It's time for Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network. With me, Dan Hadley, Birmingham's king of the geeks, regular host and designated driver. Happy to be working the gears for this 150th edition of our long-running, free-speaking, big-thinking show. Yes, I know, who'd have thought it? That's 150 Type 40s covering 15 incarnations of the Time Lord across the 61 years of Doctor Who itself. Whenever, wherever, and however you started your journey with the Doctor, well, we've probably covered it before and almost certainly will again if you keep listening and keep watching here at Type 40. Yes, so I'm sure you'll indulge that fanfare there before we commence our coverage of the brand new season of Doctor Who. Yes, so is it season 1? Is it series 14? Or is it season 40? If we want to count everything all the way back to 1963, and why not at this point? At least here at Type 40 with 150 shows, we keep it simple, don't we, Simon?
I'm really not sure. Do we keep it simple? I really don't know. I have actually got to the point where I don't care whether it's season 1 or, you know, does it really matter? We only use it purely to identify it. Secondly, it's just got so confusing with the different numbering system that really I just don't care anymore.
It is purely admin, I think. But here at Type 40, there's been no reboots, no relaunches, no restarts, and no renumbering, I'm happy to say. So at least, Simon, it keeps it simple enough for us at any rate, doesn't it? And that's what matters.
Yeah, and let's be honest, we are Doctor Who fans. We do like things to be sort of nicely compartmentalised. We like lists, etc., etc. It's just how we are as people, I'm sorry.
We do. And completing our panel for this first journey into the 2024 season, she's ever so observant and ever so patient and tolerant of all our nonsense. Yes, no plot holes will ever get past the one and only Charlotte Shields.
Oh, Russell might be giving me a job in that regard, but we'll see when we get into the episode.
Oh, just imagine. Yeah, we're up, it's flying, and we're on our way with this, Charlotte. So several episodes in already. The new era has properly begun. I do feel that although it started at Christmas with the Christmas special, that all that time in between, I wouldn't say it didn't count, but it felt like we were a bit in limbo, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it's because they didn't do a lot of marketing, like in between, even if it was just the sort of mid-tier stuff to keep interest going. They sort of went radio silent, and I think that's probably because they were gearing up for filming Ncuti's second series and then actually started filming it. So then they couldn't do the sort of more housekeeping things to keep the interest there. And even the press, it was more, you can't deny, for the series launch, but I still think that could have been a lot bigger.
Maybe it was a mistake to do the first Ncuti Gatwa episode at Christmas, in that it almost felt like sort of a double start or almost a false start, in that had we just had the David Tennant episodes to celebrate November, and maybe the last one of those would have been on Christmas, for example, and then we'd actually just kicked off with the Ncuti Gatwa stuff fresh with episode 1 in the spring of 2024. Do you know what I'm saying? It almost maybe was just a bit of a misstep to do that Christmas episode with them, in that it kind of messed things up in a way.
I agree. I think it gives off the distinct aroma of a compromise. I think I smell Disney Plus in this equation, that they wanted to hold off until the early summer, because there's no way that it's in the BBC's best interest to run brand new content, not repeat content, from one of their flagship shows during the summer months when fewer people are in.
And that's why you just think, as you said before, Dan, it would have been better if they just kicked straight off and carried on after the church at Ruby Road, or just held it all off until this point if they were going to. But you're right, it's never a good idea to show it in summer. Simple as that.
No, but I also think as well, a bit of that is not a Disney thing even. I think Russell wanted that Christmas slot back.
Yes, he did.
Wanted to have a Christmas special.
That's true.
And I think that was a prevailing feeling in him.
But wouldn't it have been better to do a David Tennant episode as a Christmas episode? Because it's sure and tested, and however much those anniversary, the November episodes might not have quite hit pay dirt, they didn't quite hit home with the public, I mean. Nonetheless, David Tennant was always going to be a safer bet than a new
You could be right.
And you just wonder whether it would have been worth doing either a fourth episode with Tennant or, as I say, doing the giggle. Think of the giggle, actually. The giggle on Christmas Day would have worked really, really well. It feels such a Christmassy episode, if you know what I mean.
I think it would have worked well enough. I think it could have been tailored quite nicely to Christmas, particularly as the toy makers in that little box for half the time, like a little present, a present from one universe to ours. Russell, we're writing this stuff. We're rewriting it for you. Oh, what could have been in another dimension?
They need us on. They need us on the team. We'll tell them what to do.
Yeah, this did kick off at Christmas. It is peculiar that in the 4 or 5 months in between, the more I think about it, the more I think that if it had have been sustained, then by now Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson could have been household names, and they're not. I know Millie Gibson she spent years on Coronation Street, but I'd argue that she's still not a household name. She's still, it's that girl from, rather than Millie Gibson, you know?
Oh yeah, I think that's totally fair. I honestly don't think many people are going to know her at all. And in all honesty, given the ratings that Coronation Street gets these days, not many people are going to know her even from Coronation Street, just as a face. To be, being brutally honest, no.
Oh dear.
It doesn't have the collateral it used to have, does it? It doesn't have the cachet.
A lot can happen in 5 months, can't it? The landscape off screen is drastically changed just in the last few months as regards Doctor Who. And they decided to go with the unprecedented move of premiering with a double bill. And that makes history in itself. Then there was the fact that they were streaming before traditional scheduled broadcasts on BBC One, on the BBC iPlayer, and on Disney Plus globally from the midnight, Friday the 10th of May and Saturday the 11th of May 2024. It all seems very, very complicated. Times are indeed changing. But what of the Doctor? We've a curiously dressed, next to new Time Lord clinging on to the controls of the TARDIS. We've got a plucky, kind of mouthy, but devoted new companion. There's the familiar sight of the blue police box that's bigger on the inside than the out, and a monster to fight off. Those are all the markers of Doctor Who. You could say that's probably all we need, Charlotte.
Yeah, and I think as your opening episode, you need to sort of get those core bases covered. You need to sort of get
planted.
You need to get the things that the fans know and that the fans sort of love as parts of this show, and you need to do those right early on to get confidence. Because we've said before, in the run-up to this series, the show needed to have confidence back. It needed to have sort of not that sort of nervous energy and that fragileness that Jodie's era created very much.
Yeah, and certainly, I've gone on record many, many times as saying that all I want from Doctor Who is a bloke in a box traveling around the universe through time and space, landing somewhere, finding an adventure, solving it, and disappearing off to the next one, with some monsters and ray guns thrown in for good measure and some spaceships. That is all Doctor Who needs. I'm obviously, paraphrasing and simplifying that down enormously, but in effect, that's all Doctor Who is. And so, theoretically, from that point of view, this should be a 10 out of 10 episode for me, shouldn't it? Because you're absolutely right, Dan. That's what you get. I got what I wished for. Did it work?
I mean, when it comes to quintessential Doctor Who and these kind of bread and butter episodes and junctions in the series history as well, where they kind of have got to hit restart, really take one or two steps back to move forward. I think it's almost like playing a tune that people may have forgotten that they know the dance moves to, and seeing who turns up, seeing who gets on the floor, who's left, depending on how late it is in the evening. There's something that taps into, particularly British viewers with Doctor Who, is something so many generations of people have grown up with. And whilst I wouldn't say it's not, Doctor Who is not an actor-proof part. I'm sorry, Tom. You were wrong about that.
It's not. Only time I've ever been wrong.
yeah, but generally speaking, I think as long as the show kind of looks the same, looks recognisable, Charlotte, and those things, those fundamentals are planted in relatively deep and there's room to grow, then people will recognise the show. And if there's enough goodwill or appetite built up, then they will turn up. We'll be giving our reviews of the latest comeback of this perennial British institution right after I remind you that if you'd like to do some real-time travelling of your own, each and every edition of this show, past, present and future, is only a tap or two away on the device of your choice, but only if you know where to look. There's 150 other podcasts, a back and forth catalogue of reviews, previews, interviews, geek outs and deep dives with all our regular panellists and lots of awesome guests. There's something for every fan, in fact, over at type40.podbean.com. Another flex later on. And of course, we'll be making time to plug our sister and brother and cousins and other shows on all the other podcasts across the Fandom Podcast Network there. Okay, so enough of the preamble. If you remember, Ruby's been out there on the curb on Christmas Day. This whole time, 5 months. At least she's got a few layers on, Charlotte. Do you remember? Thick tights.
She's got a bit of like the woolies, hasn't she? Almost with that coat. It's got a bit of fur on it, which should help her.
She has. It's time for her first trip in the TARDIS. Who knows where? With who knows who? Ncuti Gatwa is the Doctor, or is the Doctor Ncuti Gatwa? Let's find out what the panel thought about episode 1. Since Bad Wolf Studios announced they'd be taking control of all future TV Doctor Who back in autumn 2021, they've been quietly terming this a second relaunch of the world's longest running best-loved sci-fi and fantasy TV series. All new Doctor Who. It means everything old is intended to be new again. It's happened several times before. 2005, most obviously, but 1996 for one night. 1987, I think you could say, arguably, that went for it as well. And even 1970, you could say. And whilst this era did indeed commence at Christmas 2023, it's absolutely essential for the audience and the fan base to get their teeth stuck deeper into something over a much longer period of time, I think. So this kind of reminds me of several junctions in the classic show, Simon, where they take these periods of time away and then come back, and there'd be something a little unorthodox. Is it a gamble? I don't know. But you've got to hope, as we were saying before, that the audience are going to show up and they're going to be willing. That's the truth of the matter, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would argue that there was a massive relaunch of the show in 1970 when it relaunched in colour in an entirely new form. It wasn't just that it was in colour, that was coincidental. It was an entirely new show. Simple as that. It was a very, very different show to the one from the year before. 1980 was the same with the first John Nathan Turner series, season 18. That was a massive relaunch. Again, couldn't have been more different from the previous season. And then obviously 2005 was a massive relaunch, no doubt whatsoever. Is this a massive relaunch? No, categorically not. For me, personally, this is very much a continuation of the 2005 series. Okay. It's got tinkered edges, etc. But no, this is very, very much a continuation for me. And I'm in no doubt whatsoever that the only reason this is series 1 is at Disney's request.
For Disney Plus.
Disney's request, but simply because, and don't be wrong, I'm not criticizing, I get this, it makes total sense. Of course Disney want to call it series 1, it's obvious. And the BBC have just had to go along with it. I think it's as simple as that. And so I think the feeling for me is that they've bigged up the relaunch angle when actually they know it's not really a relaunch. They know it's more business the same, and it's purely down to the numbering. It is as simple as that. If 3 or 4 years, even a couple of years, had gone adrift since the end of the Whittaker-Chibnall era and the start of this, you could have argued that would be a relaunch. But no, this is to me a continuation.
It may not have as much weight on its shoulders as those previous restarts that you mentioned, come to think of it, Simon. And I think obviously having watched it now and being very familiar too with the 2005 stuff, I've seen that stuff over and over again. It does feel, I wouldn't say it feels like the intervening 14 years haven't happened,
not
Charlotte, but this does feel like a continuation stylistically from a very specific point, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so much of this episode, structure-wise, and even scene-wise, which is we'll probably get into later, really is sort of Rose / End of the World, those opening 2 episodes in 2005, because there's things that was always going to happen, like Ruby going into the TARDIS, sort of working out, oh, I'm with an alien, like I don't quite know him, like those sort of things. Him almost having to prove to her that the TARDIS could do what he said, sort of things. But I think I agree. I think writing-wise, it's more than that. It does really feel like he's almost having another crack at what he did in 2005 here.
I mean, interestingly, Charlotte, you're better placed than either Dan or I to sort of comment on this, because you started with the 2005 series, or certainly, post that. Did this feel like a relaunch to you from the 2005 block of years that had come since 2005?
No, because very quickly you get given canon events and things that happened not that long ago.
Yeah.
Very quickly talks about being adopted, which he'd already talked about in the Christmas special. So I was literally sat there going, why are you giving me this information again?
And presumably, again, Charlotte, I'm assuming that the reason for that is, for Disney's purposes, that they're seeing this as the sort of launch episode, as it were. Was the Church on Ruby Road even shown on Disney? I can't remember.
It was. That's why I'm a bit confused why we got that angle repeated again.
It's been kind of repackaged as well as episode 0 of this block, so people can still go and see it. They can go and find it, and it's right next to the new episodes in the menu. But I think the simple principle of it is that you can't sort of restate some of these things too often when you've got what's technically a new show, but one that comes with a certain amount of, I think I've seen that, or I think I saw that once, I think I've heard of that, aren't the fans of that show a bit full on, that kind of, it's some people will know that Doctor Who hasn't just farted into existence, for example. They'll know that it's a pre-existing thing.
Yes.
But obviously there's more likelihood that they haven't seen it before, or haven't seen it for a really long time.
Well, and also with the whole thing in Disney, as we know, the promotion machine only really cranked up for Space Babies, for the series one itself.
Yeah, they didn't bother at Christmas.
No, they didn't bother at Christmas. So I think it's quite reasonable to assume that Disney viewers won't particularly have seen the Christmas episode unless they were deliberately tuning in for it. And so I think Disney are very much seeing Space Babies as the launch of a brand new series, and the Church on Ruby Road is almost something that can be sort of just overlooked. And possibly, I don't know, that might be arrogance to an extent on their part, because I think I'm right in saying that they didn't have any production say so on the Church on Ruby Road. They had no involvement in it. They did,
but I think it was very much. They did, but I think it was kind of after the fact, after a lot of the billing. After a lot of the billing and cooing had been done. It is curious, but as I say, they have incorporated it into this block. So it's been a little while now since this episode aired. So just in case you've been to bed and got up a few times since then, you can't quite remember how it went down. Here's a look back at the season premiere.
Ruby, you want to know my secret? Give me a number, give me a year. It's called the TARDIS. It's a time and space machine. We are going to walk through time.
What if I change history by stepping on a butterfly? Oh, what's wrong?
Where shall we go? Anywhere. Let's have a random landing.
This place is completely mad. It's you!
Space babies! Oh, is it the universe, man?
No, you made it worse. Is that monster?
No, don't be silly. There's no such thing as monsters. They're just creatures you haven't met yet. I'd love it if you came with me.
Is it safe?
No idea.
Come on. We've got work to do.
Yes, this is Space Babies by Russell T Davies, the first of two brand new episodes of Doctor Who, which broadcast Saturday, the 11th of May, 2024. Charlotte, we want people to get back into the habit of making time for this series. The BBC certainly do. Even if they're not watching that scheduled broadcast, we need it to be habit forming again. And I think the one way that we do that is to draw people in, whether they've seen the show before or not, with a good solid story that they think they may recognise certain elements for already, place in a few archetypes, keep the tension high and the energy fizzing, and then you should have something that sits in their memory so that by the time the next one comes along, 7 days later in most cases, they want to make an appointment to view it. But it's kind of lightning in a bottle, isn't it? I think they can sit down with focus groups and creatives and try and work at that for months on end. Even when they think they've got the right ingredients, it's not always easy to tap into that, is it? Do you think that they've managed it successfully with Space Babies?
No. Like, for me, there was parts of this that worked. Like, I can't deny bits that did work for me. Actually, I would say the opening, sort of 10 minutes, was probably the most effective part of this episode, because I quite liked how they showed Ruby sort of not knowing, like that. I said that thing of her asking where to go, going out and seeing the dinosaurs. Sometimes companions can come across a bit too confident when they see sort of either space or going back in time. And I think they needed to almost do what I think he did in 2005, which is why I mentioned Rose and End of the World. Because if you look at Rose in those episodes, she almost has a panic attack. She almost wants to run away from it all. She gets overwhelmed. That's probably the best word for all of the adventures, because she's a girl from London who worked in a shop. And I think that's what those opening episodes did quite well in 2005. And the opening stuff with Ruby, I think, got that quite well done, the writing and both Millie's acting. That she wasn't sort of just like, oh, this is okay. No, she was really taken back. She was almost getting used to it. And you can just feel that sort of greenness, which is lovely again in a companion, not sort of overconfident, which is what I think New Who started to fall into a little bit near the end. And I do think when you first got in the station, the production design was really good. The sort of the horror vibe, I think, was quite well conveyed with the sort of lower levels, with the sort of the fact that you didn't see the creature. They sort of did a Jaws thing, or when you just saw bits of it and you saw flashes of it.
Because that is, at its heart, what this is, isn't it? It's a classic sci-fi creature feature, but done with a family audience in mind, in 45 minutes with some snappy dialogue, some nifty special effects, and told in pretty much the entire time in fifth gear.
Yeah. So like I said, the opening, like 10 minutes or so, I was like, okay, actually, this could work quite well. I'm sort of intrigued by the premise here. But I would say as soon as you saw more of the babies and as soon as you actually started to see what this plot was, it very much started to sort of ring of, Russell, you're going too silly here. Like, there's a balance. There's such a fine line between something that's a little bit out there and a little bit silly, but can still sort of grab you and be interesting and sort of get you sort of wondering what's happening. And like, the more it got revealed, I just felt my interest zapping, because the stakes didn't feel as high anymore. The sort of the writing I felt at times was really sort of basic denominator, very simple.
It was a very linear plot and a very simple story. But I think for me, what I would argue is that the nature of this particular beast is that actually that the cog in the machine that this works is to to get us familiar with the characters, the Doctor and Ruby in particular, to fill in some of the blanks about who they are and to connect them to one another. I feel this is a character piece with some interesting set pieces, with a big scary monster and some other quirky stuff going on, but that it's mainly, just like other episodes in the past, at this particular point in a new Doctor's run, I think that it's all there to flesh out the characters a little.
See, I would say, if you think about Rose, obviously that's my better sort of comparison. Because the Doctor was almost to the side, you got to fully meet Rose, you got to see her life, see that character realised. So the fact that the Autons weren't really much of a threat in that episode worked. Because, like I said, you had the the mystery of who the Doctor is, especially at my age at that point. I didn't have the backstory to know. Sort of, who's this mysterious bloke that keeps appearing when there's danger and just being there at the nick of time to save her, then goes. And then I think Rose was quite naturally realised on screen. So, like I said, the Autons didn't have to be sort of the opposing threat, I don't think, in that episode. Whereas here,
no, but I think this is the difference, though, Charlotte. I think this is the difference. I think that what we got in Rose back in 2005, we actually got in the Church on Ruby Road this time. The part of the puzzle that there's actually the second one. It's the End of the World. There are similarities with the End of the World all the way through this, on visually on the screen and in the things that the characters are saying. So I think I do see what you're saying, but I don't think that was what this one was trying to do. I think that what we've had Rose and the End of the World again in Church on Ruby Road and Space Babies, but this time 5 months apart rather than 7 days.
Yeah, I think this does owe more to End of the World. But if you think about Cassandra, how actually quite harsh she was, how actually quite
menacing.
Like the fact that she was quite callous, she was quite intelligent, she was sort of very like the idea of being very two-faced, almost being the sort of glamorous personality on the front, but she just wanted money and she would sacrifice all those lives on the space station without thinking. So actually, I would say Cassandra was a very compelling villain. Even if you take away the visuals of what she was, it's what her personality was. Compared that to the monster in this, and Cassandra is just so much of a better villain in every way, I would argue.
Well, yes, because in Space Babies, the monster, it's purely down to the design. It has no character. It isn't a threat. It isn't a villain.
I wouldn't even describe it as a villain. I don't think I don't think this story has a villain. I think it's a very different kind of.
Correct. It is. I mean, it is literally a boogeyman in every sense of the word. I mean, for me, I feel that the first 10 minutes of the episode, in all honesty, I think were somewhat disastrous. I think they hit a bad misstep because, again, to go back to the example of Rose, and it is the perfect example, not least because it was episode 1 of series 1, so it is a direct comparison. Although I don't particularly like that episode, I think it's quite a weak, uninspiring, and uninteresting episode, I can see the value of it and why it worked well, and that's because what RTD did quite deftly was he dropped all the exposition in and he established the characters literally on the hoof, on the run. You know, we literally in Rose hit the ground running, literally in every sense of the word, whereas Space Babies starts with a protracted TARDIS scene that just seems to go on forever, where they sort of establish this sort of relationship. It feels so late.
But again, though, Simon, without wishing to sound like a stuck record, it's a longer TARDIS scene that's very similar to the one at the start of the End of the World. We get the breathless running around in the church on Ruby Road. Right. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying, but I guess the difference is you do have to take into account that, as you've just said, Dan, the difference is that with the End of the World, there's only 7 days between those two episodes, whereas with Church on Ruby Road to Space Babies, there's 5 months. And so that's why this episode was very much a launch episode. It was the first episode of the series. It had, I think...
Already we have compromises. We have things that are compromising the long-term and short-term health of the series in service of external forces and interests. Totally. In this case, Disney Plus, but
totally.
I don't want to drift into the territory of continually villainizing Disney Plus, because I think that's low-hanging fruit. But in this instance, I absolutely blame them.
100%. It is Disney Plus. There's no doubt about it. They wanted that exposition. They wanted it setting up front. But there are different ways that this could have been done. For example, you didn't need to put it in the episode at all. If they were so determined to have it, there could have been a little pre-credits sequence, literally almost the Doctor talking to camera if you wanted to, just an introductory piece.
I would have recapped for British audiences on the British version only, Charlotte, a few highlights from the church on Ruby Road, and then I would have gone straight into Ruby coming into the TARDIS, and I would have done the pre-credit scene just as you say, Simon. Then I'd have hit the credits and then into the TARDIS lands, and off we go. That's what I would have done.
But just to finish off, the difference I would have done, all that exposition scene in the TARDIS, so they were determined that it had to be in, I would have moved it from the TARDIS to the space station, because Charlotte's quite right. The design and the atmosphere of the space station was very, very effective. They could have moved all of those scenes. They would have been much more interesting, literally being told while they were walking through the station and exploring the station, rather than just standing on the TARDIS set. It's a very simple change, and you could have got exactly the same information.
And it would have provoked a break in Ruby, whereby, just as you said, Charlotte, it would force her. She's in a place now. She's not in the TARDIS, which is all bright and white safe. And fun and safe. Yeah. Now she's in an alien environment, and it looks a bit dank. Doesn't he say that everything's knackered in the future? That's what he says to her. That would have worked so well.
I can't help but think of End of the World again. Then, if you think that's the better comparison, you've got that bit where Rose goes out the TARDIS by herself and she just walks around with an utter look of like, and on purpose, he's on that scene, Russell, in that episode, he'd put some absolutely incredible monster designs.
Yes.
That they weren't really part of the story much.
But they were just front and centre.
They were there, so Rose could be in that scene to sort of go, culture shock. I've just stepped from my life into this. And that worked. And you didn't need exposition to do that. That's my point.
Yeah, I agree totally. And as I say, I just feel, for fear again of sounding like a stuck record, I just feel it is lazy writing on Davies's part. And we'll just tell Ncuti and Millie just to be really full on, absolutely just be full of energy, just bounce around the set, just make it as exciting as possible, and just to try and hammer this home. Whereas look at that, if you'd done it walking down this set and they'd been exploring things and the Doctor had been trying the odd control panel, what does this do? Oh, that just does that releases a chute that does that. Just something interesting. It could have been less clunky. It would have come across, I think, a lot more interestingly. I fear it's lazy writing. It's much easier to do that.
But it's putting it all on your actors. Fortunately, I believe they do have great chemistry together. I don't think it's a natural chemistry in the way that some have. I think Eccleston and Billy Piper just had natural chemistry together. Yes. But I feel this is more like the chemistry that Piper had with David Tennant, which took a little bit of work. I don't think that came naturally at all, but when it did, I think we got somewhere else. That's how I feel about this. But I do think that as long as they are talking and chatting and bouncing dialogue between themselves, that keeps the energy up. I feel that that's what they wanted of this, for it to be very, very energetic and to be and to be snappy, because that's the way a lot of modern TV shows are. But I think but that's why when we get that sort of info dump, that's the expression, is it the info dump? Yes. I can forgive that up to a point, because I think it probably was necessary. It just carries on that little bit too far. Did he really need to tell Ruby at this precise point that he got 2 hearts? I can't think of a single reason why that would even come up. But he just throws it in there. And it's one of a number of things that they just, we better say this, we better say that. No, you don't need to say that. And a few years ago, Russell would have probably had the confidence where he would have resisted that. I think the way it plays kind of humanises the Doctor just to the right amount, and then Russell backs away. I think he's very clever at doing that as well, of making us think we're in the presence of, and making Ruby think she's in the presence of another human being, and then to say something that's a little bit mad or a what, like a double take moment. That's great stuff, but you can take it too far. These are nice wrinkles to the character, but it's nothing that we haven't seen before, and it's very easy to over-romanticize the Doctor as well. I think Stephen Moffat did that a lot, to have him sort of staring into the middle of this distance and some Murray Gold music swelling up in the background. I like the fact that was mostly absent as well, but it was excessive in other areas too. Ruby's a curious character, I think. There are similarities with Rose in many respects, Charlotte, I agree. And yet in other ways, she's wildly different. I mean, I like how she's undoubtedly immensely relatable. She's a completely different generation to me, but I do think she's more adventurous than Rose was naturally. And I'm not sure why that is, because obviously we're just getting to know this character. You don't want to just accept these wild things as if it's another day at the office, do you? Do you think they're in danger of doing that this early?
I don't think they are yet, because there's lots of moments where she did sort of have to take a breath. Like when she saw the monster, you could see fear in the performance and the writing. You could see more than I would argue you saw with the goblins. I would say she had definitely more fear with this creature. And this is one thing that I will praise. I think the design of this is really good.
Yeah,
I think as an actual pure monster, that really does beat some of the stuff we were getting in 2005 in some of those earlier episodes.
Yes.
I mean, we had a bin, for God's sake, that ate Mickey.
Yeah.
Like, I would rather...
I have to think about that and I laugh.
But that's what I mean. It creates that more sort of, this is more serious. But like I said, up to a point until the reveal later on.
This is the Stranger Things vibe, isn't it? The monsters influenced, I think, a little bit by Stranger Things and the nature of what's going on. We've got in Stranger Things, it's an alternative universe that exists underneath. They call the Upside Down, and in this, it's a space station that's got several levels, which of different environments that all coexist and that all kind of are connected. That's what we find out, isn't it?
I guess so. But I mean, it is just so heavily influenced by Alien as well. The corridors are straight out of Alien. The whole levels of the ship again out of Alien. The monster is straight out of Alien, even down to the glass teeth. It really is. This episode minus the space babies is Alien in every sense.
That's okay though, isn't it? 45-year-old film. It's okay.
That's not a criticism in the slightest. As we've said before now, my dream team of Robert Holmes and Philip Hinchcliffe absolutely borrowed so many of their concepts from previous from Hammer films, from Gothic horror novels. So there's nothing wrong with borrowing. So that isn't meant as a criticism.
I was going to say, how many 7 or 8-year-olds have seen Alien? But actually, probably quite a lot in 2024.
Well, yeah, probably quite a few, but no, it isn't a problem. It's all relative. If you're going to use something and give it a new twist,
yes.
And to be fair, although this episode was not for me, Davies does give it a new twist. It isn't just a rip-off of Alien; it's influenced by Alien. And as I say, no, you can't watch Doctor Who and criticise things for borrowing from other shows, other films, other genres, because that's what Doctor Who has always done. It's what you do with them. It's what you do with those things as to whether you just completely rip it off or you bring your own angle. And this does. It brings its own angle. But again, I 100% agree with Charlotte. It was holding its own. Although it wasn't grabbing me, I was giving it the credit until the point that literally the space babies trundled into the room, and that's it. I bailed. I just lost it at that point.
See, I would argue that moment that we talked about. I'm going to try not keep going back to this because I don't want to overlabour the point. But that point in End of the World that you were talking about there, Charlotte, where that room fills with alien beings, and we see Rose's reaction, and we, as the audience, we chuckle. Whatever age we are, we chuckle and we're looking all around us. I think that when the space babies, when the doors open and the space babies all turn around in their motorized chairs. Again, I was chuckling instantly. I think it was a similar, because it seems so it just seems so outlandish. The contrast is it's so ridiculous. It's so bonkers. It's brilliant.
Do you know what might have worked maybe better for me now, listening to what you're saying there, and I'm looking at it
because it jars. It's the jarring. Like, this is a space that this is literally the last thing you expect to see.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think to sort of the difference, for example, with the end of the world is what actually walk in are really interesting aliens that I'm intrigued about, and I've got a fantastic design, and I want to know a little bit more about.
Yeah.
These are just babies in push chairs that just look ridiculous. What might have worked?
But the questions, but it immediately fills you with questions, though.
It does.
Like,
it does.
Why? How? Where are their parents? And it's the same with the aliens. You think, oh, God, that one looks like a tree. That one hasn't even got a face. So it's questions.
It is questions, but as I say, the difference is the aliens in the end of the world are interesting to look at. These are just babies.
They're gorgeous.
Maybe they would have been better actually if they'd leaned into the ridiculousness of it more, and instead of actually trying to play for straight, which is what they try to do. They do try to. Well, in many ways, they try to tread quite a tricky line between playing it straight and then doing stupid stuff like the blowing of the noses and that kind of stuff. Maybe they needed to go one way or the other. Either these babies needed to be deadly serious and almost creepy, scary,
very few
in
people.
The way the Shining kids were, or they needed to lean into it completely and make them comedy babies and just
very few writers and creatives can get away with that. I'd argue that the late Roald Dahl was the master of it. Charlotte, you see what Simon's saying?
Oh yeah, no, and I think this episode, and I remember when we were just talking about the title of it, and I said, well, the title's pure comedy.
Yeah,
that
put a lot of people off, that title.
Yeah.
I know, but this is my point. The title and like these bits, like you said, with the babies and the blowing the nose and the sort of talk about mummy, daddy, that sort of stuff, that is childish. I'm sorry, it is. And I think it's designed like that on purpose, like you're talking about, Dan. It's meant to be that, oh, look, they're cute, the babies, like, why are they here? But you've got that. But then, like I said, you've got the other beats, which are horror. You've got, and for me, you're right. It's such a skill to balance that.
And I
just don't think the balance is here.
No, I don't.
Because I think it was good to see, for example, Ruby and the Doctor connect with these babies. Like, as a character moment, that was nice to see. The fact that Ruby was sort of instantly quite motherly to them. She sort of was very quick to hug them and sort of give them affection, which they clearly haven't had because they've been on this space station.
That's what I liked about her character in this as well, is that you see that she's someone who, I wouldn't say she was older than her years, but being a foster sister to potentially 30 other children throughout her life, you can see she's really, really good with kids.
Yeah, but like Simon said, I think this episode sort of straddles two worlds in a way. It's the comedy world, it's the sort of cutesy, sort of very emotional sort of stakes. And then you have the creature, sort of the stuff it starts to deal with, to do with sort of the planet we learn about later on they've come from, and the sort of the stakes that they try and create near the end of this episode. And I just think Russell was trying to have his cake and eat it, honestly.
I do agree with that. I think this episode is a kind of game of two halves. I think the first half, a little bit like the Stones of Blood. Oh, Simon's going to hate me for saying that, but I think it's a little bit like the Stones of Blood in reverse. I think we get all the kooky, mad, fast, and snappy stuff at the start that's all over the place and that's deliberately contrasting. And then the second half, it's pretty much straight adventure. And okay, the stakes go right up now, and some pretty nasty things either seem like they're likely to happen, or we imagine that they have happened. I think there's a very clear divide. But what I do like about it is that all these things that the Doctor is exposing Ruby to in the space of like 10 or 15 minutes. And he's enjoying watching how she's responding to it all. He keeps saying a few, isn't the universe mad? Stuff like that. So he's not seen this either. But there's lots of things that he hasn't seen, and he can process it a bit quicker than she can. But I think at one point he says that all of this looks even better through your eyes. So we get the idea, and I don't know if this has ever been spoken about before, that the Doctor kind of views his companions sometimes as if he can live vicariously through them. I don't think I've been aware of that before.
I think that was mentioned a bit with 11 and Amy, that he was sort of, because he met her so young, she was sort of always that child to him, and he was almost seeing her a bit like that. You sort of got that in God complex when they went in the room. So it has been touched upon a little bit, I would argue. The fact that, like you said, you got horror, but then he's trying to be funny by every 5 minutes calling space babies.
Yeah.
It's like, Russell, the joke's not funny.
You do get fed up of hearing space babies.
Funny once or twice.
That's the point. It's funny once or twice.
Yeah.
But throughout the whole episode, you got Shooties going, space babies.
Yeah, it might have been quite so bad if they hadn't called it space babies. If they called it something different, but you do get a bit bored of just space babies. But then again, yes, following on from what Charlotte's saying, to me, that was the problem with it. It was this struggle between, are you trying to do comedy? Are you trying to do pathos of these poor babies and the sympathy value and all the rest of it? Or are you trying to do horror? And it just didn't work for me with the horror stuff with the monster. And then the babies trundling around looking just utterly ridiculous, the way these motorized things were screaming. And the Murray Gold music that was all just, I could have screamed at the Murray Gold music. It was just so, I hate to use the word Disney, but if this show hadn't got any association with Disney, I would still be saying,
no, relax, Simon.
Music.
That word was in this case, that word was on the tip of my tongue as well.
It is, I'm sorry, but that music as the babies are trolling around, it's straight out of a Disney film.
It fits in the case.
But you can't, I feel that it's a struggle between that and then the horror elements. As I say, I feel they either needed to lean into one or the other. You can't really do both. And the music, as much as anything, I just found downright irritating in those baby sequences. I just thought it was actually quite poorly shot, because you did the shooting of it, the direction of it, just did make the whole baby thing look utterly ridiculous. Now, that might have been intentional, but as I say, if that's the case, then it is struggling against the horror elements of it. And I'm left thinking, I no longer know what I'm watching.
Well, I think the reason there's there's a point in the episode where the balance to that shifts quite drastically. And this is tied to, I think this is something that Russell does really, really well. I've never seen him do it with a baby before, but we've seen him do it before, where he can take something that's very light and very bouncy and do a complete 90-degree turn on us and take us right to a dark place practically in the blink of an eye. We see Ruby there hug these babies, and she does exactly what a parent or a big sister would do, and she tells them that everything is going to be okay. She knows exactly what to say or do. But this is where she becomes unstuck, because she says everything's going to be okay and the bogeyman doesn't exist. He can't hurt you. And that's what Russell uses to fuel that 90-degree turn, whereby little Eric, he takes his motorized baby scooter down to the lower level, doesn't he, to face the bogeyman. And it happens so quickly. He's there with his little plastic sword, and you gasp, and so does Ruby. You know, Ruby is absolutely beside herself. This is all my fault. The tone of the episode changes immediately, and for me, it's really effective. It doesn't feel jarring at all. It's something that Joss Whedon would have done at the height of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's that kind of moment. I feel that he pulls it off, and from that moment, everything feels that little less zany, and like it's got the potential to go somewhere far, far darker. Of course, Eric's fine, but for the split second, that's the thing, isn't it? But actually, I'll go further. For 30 seconds, I forgot that I was watching Doctor Who, and I thought maybe he's not fine. And I think that's the sign of a good writer. I think we get Russell T Davies kind of fighting with himself here with the function of this episode and his real capabilities with this kind of storytelling.
Whereas I look at that scene of little Eric coming trundling along, and I just thought, oh my God, I am watching the wrong show here. This is no longer for me, because I'm just bailing at that point.
My heart was in my mouth. It really was.
And my heart was in my mouth thinking, oh my God, somebody get me out of this. Words can't begin to describe how much I hated this episode. And that was probably the point that I was thinking, okay, really, this has now outstayed its welcome for me. I cannot take this show seriously any longer. I can't believe I'm watching this as an adult. I cannot believe I'm watching this, because this, for me, was just not aimed at adults. I don't honestly know who it was aimed at. I do feel it was it had the feel to me of the kind of level that Sarah Jane Adventures would have been at. That was where it felt, rather than being at a family audience. I don't know who it was aimed at. I genuinely don't. I'm pleased that it worked for you, and I'm pleased for it worked for anybody. But I wonder whether it worked more by luck than judgment. I don't know who they were aiming this at.
I think this is pure family adventure, and just scary enough, just funny enough that it doesn't ever. Look, I had the best time watching this. I enjoyed every solitary minute of it, and whilst I wouldn't claim that it's perfect by any stretch, this is exactly what I wanted from the restart of Doctor Who. Certainly at this point, this early on, for a lot of the reasons that you're saying you tuned out, this is exactly what I want. But when it comes to sci-fi, we obviously things have to move on. The plot has to loom into view, and other characters have to appear, don't they? And in this instance, we see this character, Nanny, is revealed to be an actual person. It's not a large cast to this episode. There are very, very few speaking parts, are there? Golda Rousseval plays Jocelyn, and she is Nanny to all of these babies, but she's never been in the same room with them. They've never been in the same room with her. It's a very maternal character, but obviously she's got a touch of the Ripleys from Alien about her. So this actress is very, very famous as one of the stars of Bridgerton, the huge Netflix show that's just dropped a third season. She's been trying to get on Doctor Who for years, always fell at the final fence of an audition. They've obviously snapped her up for this, given the fact that Bridgerton's so huge, Charlotte. But when she enters the story, do you feel that this adds something, that this character adds much needed other layers to it and ups the sci-fi quota a little bit?
Yeah, I think at the midpoint of this story, my attention was going. So I think when she appeared on screen, it did sort of get me back a little bit. Because you are right, there's no other real human except from the babies at this point. So to have an adult and more sort of older character, it does do what I think was very on purpose. Like you said, it was, come on, here's another human. You've not seen many of them so far on the episode, so she's going to get your attention. And I think she was quite well acted. Like when she was delivering the lines about how she didn't want them to see her die, and that's why she'd never shown herself. I bought that she was sort of protecting them and that sort of motherly thing, but a bit broken because she's been alone on this ship for how many years, I can't remember. And she got that success, so that sort of strength, but it was a bit fragile, it was a bit broken, like I said, because of being isolated. And that's what happens to us when we're by ourselves. We don't work very well. So you got that off her.
I see. I just come from a completely different place. Yes, you're right, Charlotte. It was the midpoint. We definitely did need it to change gear slightly because I was well and truly bored by that point. But this was not really the character that was interesting enough or different enough or intriguing enough for it to reignite my interest. It's a nanny. She's doing a lot of moaning. I'm supposed to feel sorry for her. We're back again to angst. And I look at something, let's for example, let's take Alien, because there is a direct comparison with Alien there. Let's take Alien as the example. You're right, Charlotte. If they're on that, if a human is on a ship like that, they are going to go stir crazy. They're going to get issues, etc. But you look at something like Alien, and that to me is the difference between how it's done well and how in Space Babies it's done poorly. Because at no point during Alien do you get the kind of angst-ridden, specific, on-the-nose dialogue that we get in Space Babies. It's just dropped through discreetly, carefully, subtly, and you pick up on the vibes of how these people are rather than being told. And this angst that is brought there, that I'm supposed to feel sorry for these people that I've known for a good 45 seconds.
When they showed the crew, like 10 seconds videos, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And for me, that was useless.
Yes.
Because I was like, Russell, what am I meant to do with that?
He banks on the fact that they're all humanoids and they're all dressed like characters out of Star Trek. I think he relies on that too. I think in serious sincerity, in all sincerity, I think that visual cue to tap into something we recognise from something else, I think that's why it's there. In fact, Star Trek gets mentioned a few times through this. He does drop a little comment about maybe going off to see them, which I think could put the fear of God into the cast of Star Trek. I don't know.
No, but the problem is, by showing them, actually, the only thing I did get off them was, so you're the people who left the babies. You're the people that abandoned all these little babies. Yeah. So actually, the only thing I can feel about you is that you're all a little bit stupid.
Yeah.
And a little bit unfeeling. And like that, but that's not a strong emotion. I just felt like that was the only thought I had, just... oh, okay, they're just leaving.
Well, it's meant to be a cautionary message, isn't it, of some sort? It's meant to be cautionary.
But there's not enough time.
Doesn't she say something?
There's not enough
time. They had children that they didn't want to care for. Yeah, but it is, that's a lot of the fault. We've been complaining, Simon, some of us, for 20-odd years about the 45-minute episode format. Is there, because Charlotte's quite right, there isn't enough time. Is there ever enough time?
There isn't a four-parter in 2 50-minute episodes. Yes, there is. But the thing is, for 2 45-minute episodes, i.e. the equivalent to an old four-parter, you'd have to have so much more going on than this particular episode has got. You could never have begun to stretch this remotely to a four-parter. And this, again, is a fault of those 45-minute episodes. So you've got to have such a thin idea in the first place. It doesn't make a very satisfying 45 minutes.
If strings of this plot element had been introduced slightly earlier, just as Charlotte says, they could have played them a little bit more. We needn't have met Nanny when we did, but maybe, just as you say, Charlotte, there could have been other crew logs left behind. There could have been little steps along the way.
The problem I am having with Russell's writing at the moment is I feel like he's doing shortcuts because
I agree.
He's sort of doing the quick way to get certain elements in the plot.
Same as I was saying with the TARDIS scene, with that TARDIS opening scene. It's the quick way of doing it.
Yeah, and I just feel like back in 2005, for me, I think he seemed to realize how much space he needed to give certain elements in the plot, how much time something in an episode actually should have been in there, so you can give more time to something else. I feel like 2005 Russell was a lot more effective, whereas Russell now, and this happened in the specials, this is why I'm saying it, I feel like it's a pattern. There's things that he's just like, right, I need this in the plot, so I'm just going to put it in there and then leave it, and then it's there, and then I don't have to think about it almost.
Despite what I've just said about how elements of this could have been introduced earlier, what I did appreciate about this side of the story was the floating of ideas and scenarios and an ambiguity to it. There were things that we didn't see, ideas that this story put into our heads, about the society that had birthed these children, that had kind of abandoned them, and the culture that Nanny had come from, and how her duties had informed her decisions. I think that was interesting. I think the actress was quite good, but I'd have liked them to have dug a little deeper, and I think they could have done, because the idea that they have children that they didn't want to care for, you could say, perhaps I'm reading a little bit too much into this, but you could say that that's a statement on traditional gender roles and family values in our world now in the 21st century. Latchkey kids, this kind of way of life that we've found ourselves in, where both parents have to be working for them to be able to afford to raise children, but the byproduct is that they spend less time with their children. That kind of thing. I don't think that was necessarily Russell's intention, because that's actually quite a trad statement to make, and Russell's very, very progressive. But the fact that he can float something out there like that and have it interpreted in a few different ways means that this is real writing, these are real ideas, this is not a manifesto, this is not a lecture. And I noticed this several times through the episode, to my, if not delight, then relief. For example, we live in a world where next to cultists are publicly telling young people and children that the opposite of something that the Doctor says in this very story. The Doctor says to one of the space babies, "No one grows up wrong." It's the complete opposite of what the wokists, who are pushing certain ideologies, are telling young people and children in the real world in the 21st century. Now, is Russell aware what he's saying there? Because that contradicts things that he would seem to outwardly believe in.
I suspect that what he's actually doing there, I mean, that scene in particular just felt, again, just a little bit too much on the nose for me, not subtle enough. It felt a little bit blunt. And I think that what he was probably saying there was, you don't grow up wrong. You grow up perfect for you. That doesn't necessarily mean that you won't want to change and become something slightly different as you grow up. But that's still going to be correct for you. That you're still growing up correct. No, I think
you see what I'm saying though. It's open to interpretation.
I do see what you're saying. Yeah, it's absolutely down to interpretation. I hadn't seen it like that. I must be honest. When I saw it, I immediately thought, "Oh God, I'm being lectured to about." I think Russell has stepped
on the same rake there that the makers of the Barbie film did last year, where they tried to make a film. They tried to make a film that was uber feminist, and the message that they ended up sending to everybody was that Kennedy mattered more than anything else, and that actually traditional conservative values were probably the best way to achieve a truly fulfilling life. And they did that by accident. That Greta Gerwig has no idea that was what the film was ultimately saying to the public. And I don't think that Russell is aware of what he said in the body of this.
No, because he was very, very much clearly on the side of, as you say, he's coming from that sort of woke mentality, and so no, I know very much how he meant that statement, but I can also see why you would take it slightly differently. But this is why, again,
that's proper science fiction. That's proper science fiction writing, though, isn't it? That's what the writers on Star Trek: The Next Generation used to do. They would kind of explore things a little more deeply than that, but they would offer up these notions and people would talk about them afterwards. You wouldn't turn off the TV feeling like you'd just been given a flea in your ear, or you'd just have a finger pointed right in your face.
But I do a little bit after something like that scene. I do feel a little bit like I've had a finger pointed in my face. It's not true science fiction for me personally. That's not my idea of science fiction. It is to
social commentary.
The problem is, Dan, I think it's all about, again, how it's done. If you do it subtly, then it can be done. Whereas that, to me, does not feel particularly subtle. To me, it's a clunky. Well, not necessarily clunky moment. To me, it's clunky. I agree that for other viewers such as yourself, it wouldn't be seen as clunky, but it is very deliberate. It's on the nose. There's no subtlety. There's no obliqueness to it. That whatever, for right or wrong, however, whatever point he's trying to make, he's definitely making a point, and he lets you know he's making a point.
Simon, I can't count the amount of times that I've said how much of a fan I am of Russell T Davies' work inside and outside of Doctor Who. One thing I would never claim him to be is subtle.
Right, I think on that one we certainly agreed. He's definitely not subtle. Subtlety is not his strong point.
The crux of the matter is that through the plot moving on and Nanny explaining exactly what is what and who's who and why they're all there in the first place, the Doctor intends on quickly getting these babies to safety, doesn't he? But the creature is in the way in time-honoured adventure storytelling style. So they've got to get past the bogeyman. Again, this does remind me of classic monsters, from not just from things like Stranger Things, but right the way back to sort of the creature from the Black Lagoon, all that kind of thing. David Cronenberg's The Fly, but dialed back for kids. So we get lots of running around, don't we? Get banging of pipes, all that kind of thing. It feels like, remember that episode of Red Dwarf where they have to fight the Corrie monster? That's also an alien pastiche, which I know is like 30 odd years old. Felt just like this. This monster isn't made of curry, of course. This monster is composed of something else entirely. It's of snot that's been taken from the babies when they've had their noses blown, doesn't it? And it's been deposited in the lower levels, and over however many years it's evolved, hasn't it, into this creature. Again, this feels very Roald Dahl as well to me, Charlotte.
No, see, to me it doesn't, because I adore Roald Dahl. And for me, Roald Dahl understood to be silly, you have to have a core of seriousness for your silly to work. The way Roald Dahl would write his characters, they were over the top. They were on purpose. They were drawn by Quentin Blake to be these like cartoonish creatures. But actually, if you looked beneath the surface stuff, there was actually a serious sort of idea there. And that's what Roald Dahl would always do. Whereas to me, there's nothing underneath the surface here in this creature.
Yeah.
Willy Wonka, on the surface, he's this wonderful, childish, almost doctor-like, you could say. Mm-hmm. But actually, if you know the book and you know the original movie, what's beneath all that, he's actually quite a sad man.
Yeah,
he's actually quite miserable. So you've got the surface level and you've got the underneath. That's what Roald Dahl did best. Here, it's literally just a snot creature.
The sense of the grotesque, as the comically grotesque, because for the first 25, 30 minutes, we're told, aren't we, how this creature is bred. We're led to believe it's been bred somehow in one of the darkest corners of the universe just to be scary. And even the Doctor is scared by this. He's very consciously scared and curiously scared. He knows this reaction is coming, that it might be manufactured and coming from somewhere. So that's what keys him in to the code that he eventually sort of cracks. So we've got that kind of intrigue. But when they do flip it, because that would have, I know for a fact that would have scared the life out of all my children. That creature roaming around those corridors underneath that space station, even if it wasn't babies on the upper level, my kids would have found that pretty scary. But what I think they do here is they dispel that just at the right moment in the right way. Even the Doctor is sort of bigging it up a little bit, as if he's telling a story around the campfire to deliberately scare these children. He's reveling in it up to a point, and then he realizes it's very, very serious. But the moment that I truly loved more than any other, and I so wish I'd still got kids of the age that were young enough to sit and watch this with me rather than go off to the pub and do the things that they do now. But it's the moment where the Doctor and Ruby are talking about, they're putting it together, the nature of this creature, what it's made of, where it's come from. And obviously she gets covered in green goo, doesn't she, from some open tube
Like a vent
or some ventilator or something. He gets completely covered in it. And when the doctor realizes what it is, he says, it's literally the bogeyman, and he's made of like that. And all the time that he's saying that and Ruby's not cottoning on, the kids watching at home are going, bogies. They are shouting at the telly, bogies, bogies. And they've gone from being really, really scared, and, Mummy, I don't know if I want to watch this anymore, or Daddy, why have you insisted I watch this show? They go straight from that to shouting bogies with great big smiles on their faces, because that danger immediately changes from one thing into another. I just thought it was the most beautiful moment, absolutely hilarious. And I just know what kids' reactions would have been to that. And that's what I love about new Doctor Who, about 21st century Doctor Who, that it can do stuff like that we never really had in the classic series. And to be fair, that not many other TV shows are capable of doing, because they're not so aimed perfectly at a family audience. They tend to be either aimed at older people or younger people, like you say, Simon. Like you say, Simon, the Sarah Jane Adventures, or you're looking at higher concept sci-fi, purpose-built sci-fi shows, whereas this sits firmly in the middle, and it can have the kids interacting like that, adults laughing at the kids, and everybody's having a bloody good time.
Yeah, whereas, as I say, that was the point again, that I just got so many points during this episode. I was thinking, I am watching the wrong show.
You just weren't feeling it, were you?
No, I certainly wasn't. Maybe I needed kids. I don't know. But if that's the case, then this is where I kind of look at it and I say, okay, a show, if it's going to be a family show, it does need to work on more than one level. And to me, a snot monster is only working on one level, and that's the child's level, because no adult is okay. An adult might have fun out of watching their kid watching it, but that's not the point. The adults are still going to get something out of the show itself. And that was the point at which I genuinely thought, I am now watching a children's program, because only children will be amused by this. But not only that, the best children's shows are always treated in an adult way. So to put a snot monster in, you're not even treating it in an adult way.
It's the same thing. It's the same thing as when we spoke to the lovely Shah quite recently, didn't we? And she said, I've never seen the Aztecs and the Caves of Androzani. And you said to her, go and watch those two stories. She went and watched them. And what did we enjoy? So we didn't watch them with her.
Yeah.
We've seen them, a lot of us, hundreds of times.
Yeah.
But when she came back and told us what she thought about them, it makes us feel good to see that she had a good time with them. And I think it's the same thing with parents and children and something like this. I think it's a similar response.
But if that's the case, then we are saying you've got to have children to enjoy this show, and that's a problem, because in the
this episode, I think you have to have children. I think you have to have children to get the most out of this episode, or to be in a family environment. That's more to the point.
See, I would argue it'd have to be very young children, though.
Yeah,
because if you look at what children like, as the broad sense, what they're what they're watching, what they're playing, video games, which is a massive thing that kids are now playing. I'm sorry, this level of writing is not good enough for those other formats, for what kids are actually watching. Or like I said, that
moment is for the 7, 8, 9 at a push-year-olds. That's if you like, that's the burping bin moment. That's the interactive moment. If you watched the Rose, that episode with a child back in the day, as I did, the kids had burped. They'd done the fake burp noise before the sound effect comes on the TV. Just that split second, and that's where the joy was for them. The fact that they were right. And I think it's the same with this.
I would argue the burping bin was a side scene. It was a small part of the episode.
Yes.
You still had the stakes of that finale, and by having your main monster, and I'm sorry, Dan, it is the main monster in this story.
Absolutely.
By that being basically cut under, the legs being cut underneath it, and saying, "Oh, isn't it funny?" Then the episode evaporates, because I
don't agree. I think the episode evolves. I think at that point it moves into its final act. And the stakes immediately change, because his place in everything And at the beginning of the story, we talk, or they talk a little about the Doctor's values and why he travels and what he sees and the nature of the universe and seeing things through Ruby's eyes. In that moment, when the Doctor realizes that creature doesn't really matter what it's made of. It's the fact that it's one of a kind, that it's the only creature like that in existence. It doesn't matter what it's made of. It matters the fact preserving that life if he can. And that's when the Doctor's values, and more importantly, for us, watching the Doctor's heroism races to the surface as well. So that's when we get some action too. I think this episode does try, just as you said, Charlotte, it does try to please everybody. I can't speak to how well it does that roundly for everyone, but I think that we're supposed to get the whimsical stuff, we're supposed to get the horrific element, and this is where the adventure really kicks in.
Yeah, whereas it's odd because at the end, that is where, for me, I must be honest again, same as Charlotte, it really fell apart catastrophically at the end. I just didn't get the sudden change. I've had 40 minutes being told that this monster is terrifying, so terrifying that it terrifies the Doctor, and then for no apparently
But he's still scared. He's still kind of scared.
Well, yeah, but for no well-scripted reason, he suddenly decides that it's got to be saved. The monster's got to be saved.
At that point, they push it all onto the actor.
Yeah, they do, because the writing to me is so poor. It just doesn't make clear. Now I can obviously read between the lines and I can work out for myself that that's what's happening. But it was a change of character too far for the Doctor, because I just hadn't believed it until that point. I didn't see on screen the moments which I needed to see at which the Doctor thought, hold on a second here, there's more to this. We've got to save this monster. It's just purely written and poorly directed that suddenly the Doctor's got to save it. To me, it was equally poorly written and poorly directed that we've got the nanny who suddenly now wants to kill everybody. And then suddenly Millie just bursts back into the room and saves the day. And suddenly the nanny's like, oh no, what was I thinking? What was it? It's so clunky. It's so, oh my God, we've got 5 minutes left of this episode. I've got to tie everything up straight away.
I think we're back in that place, because I agree with you. Yeah. I thought that was very, very clunky. And yeah. I think that was the weakest part of the entire story. And this is why I remember now that when they increased the runtime of each episode from 45 minutes to 50 minutes during the Peter Capaldi era, I think it was, why I heaved a sigh of relief, because that extra 5 minutes enabled you to play scenes like that out in a more natural way, because you're quite right, that scene was sorely lacking.
It was nonsensical.
It was inconsequential almost, which is wrong. Yes. Yeah, you're quite right.
I think if you're going to have that issue, you need to put other stuff which then can come into focus and be important. It makes me think of The Beast Below. If you think about the star whale, that was hinted at all throughout the episode, what that was, because you had the fact that the children weren't being eaten. You had sort of the tendrils, which you didn't quite know, but you saw. So you got the idea that there's a creature of some description here. You got the idea of the voting, which backed it up. You got the idea of the Queen wiping her own memory and doing the forget option. So you got this real creeping sense in Beast Below that something's not right here. We're not getting told the whole story about the ship, about how it runs, about why it runs. And then you got the reveal of the creature and what they were doing to that creature. They were basically torturing it, because they thought if they didn't do that, it would basically make the ship go and they'd be stranded. So that was their reasoning. So then when you got the Doctor's moment of him basically saying, I don't like this, I hate what you're doing, but the better option is to actually make it go brain dead, because then it's not suffering anymore. So you got all that build up, and then it made sense why Amy could see what she saw. That moment when she turned around and she said, no, it's the last of its kind. it couldn't let the children die.
And that's what this episode needed. It needed that moment, and you didn't see it. It was either lost in the writing or it was lost in the direction.
It looked quick, but actually, if you thought back to the episode, Moffat had laid the groundwork. He put lots of little things.
I disagree that there's no groundwork. I think we're supposed to. I think it rests on Ncuti Gatwa and us being in step with his doctor right from the very beginning about his values and how he lives his life, and no job, all that kind of job, no mission. But these are the things that I believe in, and in these moments where I'm confronted with my values, I act now. I decide now in that split second, and I have to practice what I'm preaching to those in my care, and to step up in a very physical way. We see we see the doctor being physically very, very heroic, which is something again. I don't necessarily think the Beast Below is a fair comparison. I think I do see what you mean, but I don't think I don't think we should lay blueprints over this episode from anywhere else in that manner. I think it's unfair.
No, I'm not laying the blueprint. What I'm saying is, because of how we just said, how Ruby can suddenly go running and telling her to stop, from the nurse to suddenly switch, from the babies that were scared to death of this thing to then call it doggy.
Yeah, which was ridiculous. Again, equally ridiculous.
That's my point. For all those quick character changes, you
5
need
minutes
the writing.
5 minutes extra would have sorted all of that. I think they're really gonna regret cutting this down.
What I'm saying is, once again, if Russell knew he didn't have 50 minutes, he needed to put little stuff in this episode that the doctor was. I understood the doctor. I completely understood why the doctor did what he did. And I will agree with you on that point. It was laid out with the doctor why he did that act. And it was a good thing that Ncuti did that. Completely 100% agree with you. But for Ruby, for the nurse, for the babies, there needed to be something else in this episode to justify that change. And all I said is the Beast Below, there was stuff there that you could understand Amy a little bit.
It felt very.
I don't agree. I think that I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying about the bare mechanics of the script. But in that moment, if this piece of entertainment has done its job, we are with the doctor. We understand what he's got to do, why he's got to do it. We want him to survive, and it all hinges on us being captivated by this story. I was, in a way that you guys clearly weren't. So I wasn't thinking about what Nanny was doing or what the babies were doing by that point, because I thought, well, everything's kind of going to be okay. This is what the doctor's going to need to do in the here and now, because this is who he is. And this is another thing I liked about this as well. We're back to the kind of storytelling that explores not so much who the doctor is, but why the doctor is and the things that he does and what marks him out as a hero from any other hero in all of sci-fi storytelling, certainly maybe in the whole of popular fiction. I don't know. I accept results may vary, but I think it does hinge on you see what I'm saying? How captivated you are by the entire thing.
Oh, it does.
Is whether you're I've no doubt that all those things are there and aren't there. But for me, my mind never really went there because I was caught up in the moment, just the same way as I was with the Ninth Doctor and Jabe when he got to turn off those giant turbines in the basement in the End of the World. I think it's almost exactly the same here, and it all gets pushed onto Ncuti, who doesn't really say a great deal. We hear his heartbeat, we see the look on his face, we hear his words back, and he's got very, very little time to sort of make a decision. And I like the fact that they took time as well to give us the Doctor being traditionally heroic, because this is something that we haven't seen for so long. Ncuti Gatwa was obviously a very physically capable actor. I think it's good to have somebody like that playing the part as well. We've seen him dancing around on the balls of his feet. I used to feel that Matt Smith could have slowed down a little bit. I think it's of a similar kind of thing, that impishness. But I like the fact that there he was pushing himself to a limit for the sake of his own values and what's right, and to demonstrate to his companion and to everybody else in the equation, and to do his best because he'd got to live with the consequences. So that's what I enjoyed about it. It reminded me of the end of Fort of Doomsday a little, when the depressurized environment. And of course, it reminded me again of Alien and Aliens. They did that. In fact, they did it. Did they do it in Alien? They didn't do it in Alien 3. They did it in Alien 4.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Yes, I just feel like heroism and masculinity are back. It's a great relief to me. The resolution to the quandary, of course, is how they're going to get the babies finally to safety. They do it by making the space station let rip. The space station does a ginormous fart that sets it on the right course. That's the conceit behind this, which again, it is very, very childish. And but again, I'm fine with this stuff. I think it's very playful and it's harmless. Is it science? Probably not. I think they do use methane power somewhere, don't they, in engineering, Simon?
I haven't got a clue. I've no idea. But I don't think it's probably very good science. But it doesn't matter. Fort of Doomsday, you just mentioned, that has terrible science in it. It doesn't matter. That doesn't worry me in the slightest. What worries me is just this kind of degree of lavatorial humour that Davies does love, and I absolutely hate. It was what turns me off from the word go in many of the episodes in 2005 and onwards. Aliens of London, being the prime example. I just hate this kind of lavatorial humour, and again, it's the same with the snot monster. I wouldn't mind so much with the snot monster if it did actually look like it was made out of snot, but it didn't even remotely look like it. So if you're going to do it, you might as well do it properly.
I'm not going to claim that this makes it all right, but I do feel that at numerous points in the script they tell you what this is. Ruby actually says it's a children's story come to life, and I wouldn't want Doctor Who to be like this every week. This isn't what I want to be. The default setting for this version of Doctor Who. But I think as it stands, as a first episode back, if you want to tempt people, okay, this is what this show is. This is who the central character is. This is some of the kind of stories. You've got adventure, you've got horror, you've got something zany, all in the mix here. This is where this show can take you. These are the range of emotions that you can feel watching this show in just 45 minutes. I think this was a pitch for many of the things that Doctor Who could do. I think that was the intent.
Yeah, whereas I would say this is just a classic example of what Doctor Who is not really about. It's a very fine line. It's almost there, but it's that far away, if you know what I mean. To me personally, yes, you've got some of the elements there that you need, that I've always craved within Doctor Who, but it just the sum of the parts is so much less than the individual components for me. I just thought it was a car crash.
I can see this. I can see something like this. I can see something like this in line with stories like The Power of Kroll, for example, where Kroll is the giant gelatinous green monster is a piece of the key to time, or Dragonfire, where this creature that's been on the lower levels of a space station, for all intents and purposes, is also revealed to be carrying this jewel, and it's not what it appears to be. I think it's a similar kind of storytelling, and that got a little girl running around in that as well. I think Doctor Who has been here before to varying degrees of success.
But it's always that lavatorial humour that Davies just cannot resist but bring.
Blows you away.
And it just alienates me entirely, if you'll pardon the pun. It just does. I'm not interested in lavatorial humour. It's very childish. It's very schoolboy. It's very immature. It's just simply of no interest to me. I don't like it. It doesn't work. I don't find it exciting or interesting or fun or anything. I just find it tired and cheap. And it shows to me how far out of touch he is with what modern drama actually requires, because short of a kids' TV program, you simply wouldn't find this level of humour in television drama.
I am a little bit out of step with children's TV at the moment, so I honestly don't know if there are many escapist dramas for children on TV at the moment. Charlotte, what are the big shows?
I think more kids actually is what I was sort of talking about before. They don't tend to watch as much as so-called designed kids' TV. They seem to just watch whatever's on Netflix or on the streaming that's pretty much any age appropriate. I think there's still a need. I think there's still some need for it, but I just think it's lesser now, if that makes sense, as to when I was growing up and then when Simon and you were growing up, it's just not as much of a need there.
It's time for a short break now to gather our thoughts and collect our scores, which, as luck would have it, is exactly how long it'll take Kev to fill you in about all the other great shows and engrossing conversations going on across the Fandom Podcast Network. Listen up, stay right where you are. Back in a mo.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blooded Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our Fandom Flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast, we cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. The True Believers MCU podcast discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. Union Federation, our Star Trek and the Orville show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek Universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
And you can treat yourself or treat your other selves to a little something from a selection of merchandise over at the Fandom Podcast Network's TeePublic store. There's a link to that in the show notes. It all goes right back into supporting the Fandom Podcast Network too. Its continuing mission to keep you topped up with the very best in geeky pop culture coverage so everybody wins. Charlotte, Simon and I have been proper brave little soldiers here, haven't we? Recapping and reviewing the series 14 season 1 premiere, Space Babies by Russell T Davies. Now it's that customary point in the conversation where we deliver our verdicts. So I suppose the simplest question is to ask you, after all this deliberation, you're somewhat of a tough crowd when it comes to this story. So what I want to know, Charlotte, is how many great big space farts out of 5 would you give Space Babies by Russell T Davies?
Oh, this has been such a hard one because there's things I really didn't like in this. And then when it was more character stuff, whether that was Doctor or Millie or sort of their relationship as a Doctor companion focus, it worked for me definitely in those bits. But all the actual plot relevant stuff, whether that's the Snot Monster, whether that's the babies, whether that's the stakes or the lesser, how the stakes got taken, for me, completely out of the picture. I think they were really, and also for me, in bits of this, the writing was just very sort of juvenile. And then for me, that's the word I would use. So, like I said, a real mixed bag.
You're saying that like it's a bad thing.
Well, yeah, because I think you can have something that's silly but still intelligent. And for me, it was just silly. It didn't have the intelligence there. So yeah, it's sort of such a mixed bag. Mm-hmm. So I'm sort of, I'll say 3 for what I did like, but it has to lose points. Like I said, it can't be. I enjoyed Church and Ruby Road so much more than this, and that also had fantasy elements. But for me, that worked. So yeah, I'll give this a very generous 3. I'll say.
And how about you, Simon? How many great big space farts do you give Space Babies out of 5?
You really don't want to know. This is very simple for me. There is no doubt in my mind this is a big fat 0. This is the worst Doctor Who. I'm sorry, I can find nothing to commend or enjoy in this episode. Absolutely 0.
We've been doing this show for so long. Classic and new series reviews. I don't think I've ever heard you give a 0 before.
I don't think I ever have given a 0 before, but this to me is just the lowest of the low. I never want to see this episode again. I would very happily get in my TARDIS and go back and expunge it from history so it never ever happened. I just found it unwatchable. I didn't like the chemistry between Ncuti and Millie. I found it forced. It felt like they were being told, just keep the energy up, just keep on being funky. I hated the script. I love some of the design work, but because the script and the direction and the acting is so poor and it looks so cheap, it's such a terrible season opener with only one other speaking, genuine major speaking part. It looked like a mid-season filler. So any good aspect, which was basically the design work, and that's it, it was blown out of the water by just how awful everything else was. I hated this episode. I'm at this point in time, from Space Babies only, I'm embarrassed again to be a Doctor Who fan, and I pray not many people have watched it. I hated it. It's a 0, no doubt. Sorry. What are you giving it, Dan?
Well, for me, I agree with you, but I agree with you up to a point about the chemistry between them. As I say, I don't think it's natural, but I do like it. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of fascinated by the 2 characters. I'm wondering where the hell this guy was at Christmas, because I felt that Ncuti Gatwa was merely adequate in the Christmas special. I'm starting to get a feel for who his character actually is in this, who he is, what kind of actor he is. And I am kind of fascinated by the choices that he's making and the various contrasts to his take on the Doctor. So I like that. And for me, Space Babies itself makes for a confident, if bizarre, and very idiosyncratic season premiere. As I said, I wouldn't want Doctor Who to be like this every time. Of course, I wouldn't. But I think that starting with the kooky one it may be audacious. It could be reckless. But I think what it did do really well was to leave those watching with a restated sense of what the show is, what it's about, who it's for, that family audience, and a hint of the various places that it could go, that it can go and does go, that marks it out from the pack. I haven't enjoyed the few years that we've had where Doctor Who has been a follower rather than a leader. I think this is Doctor Who claiming its own identity right back. I adored every minute of this on both watches. It put a great big smile on my face. I accept that Space Babies won't be for every dedicated fan. Of course, that's okay. But for me, after years of this series being in the doldrums, wagging its finger, tying the audience up in knots with plots that sometimes don't go anywhere, let alone anywhere of any real worth, and messing with its own history and reaching, trying to coax that alternative audience that we all know doesn't bloody exist. All that's gone to one side. This feels like a joyous return to real Doctor Who for me. There's lots of places that it can go, and I'm going to give it a very confident 4.5 out of 5. Great big space farts. I absolutely adored it, and I really had to rein myself in to not give it 5. I really, really did. And this is the kind of Doctor Who that I'm more than happy to take. If Simon's not,
I'm just this is kind of. I never want to see Doctor Who like this ever again. Please.
Okay, the double bill season 1 premiere of Doctor Who, all new Doctor Who from Bad Wolf Studios and BBC Studios. That continued, of course, with The Devil's Cord. That's the story for another time, but further episodes are dropping weekly, premiering on Disney Plus internationally, and they're on the BBC iPlayer in the UK. They've labelled it all a cosmic joyride on the posters. That's as cheesy as hell too. But in this instance, perhaps it fits. Charlotte, I'll give you the last word.
Well, yeah, we'll see.
But time will tell on that one.
And the more I think about this, the more I really think this series, we're going to have to really take it episode by episode and just see where Russell takes it, what sort of styles, what sort of stories, and what sort of overall plot. Because there is hints of there being something with Ruby, and we'll see where that goes. I am intrigued, though. I will happily admit I'm intrigued by the Ruby plot line. So I'm hoping that becomes a really good sort of ending, sort of series end is the vibe I'm getting off that. And I'm really sort of waiting to see what he does with that.
And Simon Horton hanging on by your very fingernails, aren't you? I can tell.
I'm virtually out of Doctor Who at this point. I think it's very, very unlikely that I will get to the end of this season. I said it 3 years ago, or whenever it was that RTD was first announced that he was coming back. I said then it wasn't something I was pleased about. It was the worst news I could possibly hear. And I was happy to be proven wrong. But sadly, so far, I have not been proven wrong. This just was the worst thing that could happen to Doctor Who for me, was for him to come back. I think it's a massive mistake. I think it will backfire. I genuinely don't think this Doctor Who is going to resonate with the audience. I don't think it'll win a new audience. I think it's a misstep. And I think, I'll state my claims now, I think cancellation is probably one season away.
Bold talk. Series 14, or Season 1, they're calling it Season 1. Season 1 is out on home media. This is on the 12th of August 2024, a 7-disc set on DVD and Blu-ray, and you have the option of a steel Blu-ray edition to this entire season, starring Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson. The DVD is $39.99, Blu-ray is $49.99, and the Steelbook is listed at $59.99. I think those prices are probably going to come down in the meantime for anybody who wants to pre-order. I think they knock them off at a later date. That's the old girl starting up and calling time. Type 40 will be back with podcast number 151 soon enough. Look out for that wherever you found this. It could have been at the dedicated home feed for Type 40. That's at type40.podbean.com. Maybe we rolled up on the podcatcher of your choice. Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all those places. It'd be easier to tell you the places that you couldn't find Type 40. We're also on YouTube, the world's largest streaming platform, on the Type 40 channel, with extended video editions of each and every show. There's exclusive extra Type 40s, as well as our sister show, that weekly live stream magazine show, Type 40 Live, completely raw, completely live, where anything can happen, anything can be said, and often is. So get all of that at Type 40 on YouTube. We're still on the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network's own master feed, loaded up with so many treats for your ears. Never mind on the weekly, it's coming at you on the daily, so please consider a trip sideways in time for more of those quality shows from the FPN. Why not reach out to us through our social medias, Instagram and X at Type40 Doctor Who, or you can email us at type40doctorwho@outlook.com. There's always the Type 40 Facebook group too. Join the discussion, the never-ending debates on the merits and not of the classic series, the new series, and already it's full of a wide range of opinions, not just on Space Babies, but further episodes of this season of Doctor Who, so come and have your say too. Simon, where can people find you on social media now?
They can find me on the Hoonatics on Facebook. So come and say hello there. WHONATICS, the Hoonatics.
Simple. There's no fat on that, is there?
No, absolutely not. I don't do any of the social media, Dan. I'm quite happy to stay away from the rest of it.
And you can find me on Instagram and X as the Space Book, wheezing and groaning, ranting and raving about all things geeky inside and outside of the TARDIS, in TV, movies, comic books, and all manner of other things. Now and again, I stray into the scarier realm of the real world. But apart from that, you should be safe if you follow me there on Instagram and X. Thanks again for your company, Simon, for braving this tormentuous episode of Doctor Who, by the sounds of it. Close to deal breaker, I think.
Yeah, very, very close. Yeah, I really needed this episode to drag me back from the brink, and it hasn't. It's pushed me over the edge. So there you go. What can you do?
Oh dear, it can only get better, can't it? Maybe.
One would hope so, if I'm even watching the next episode.
Yank the handle and hope for the best. We always have the time if you have the space here at Type 40. Take care. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.